Hello and welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight we bring you Na Do-hyang's short story, The Female Barber. Set in 1920s Tokyo, it follows a single afternoon in the life of a poor young student. He pawns his sleeping clothes for a 50 jeon silver coin and sets out to get a haircut, only to find an unexpected moment waiting for him at a modest third-class barbershop. Let this drowsy summer afternoon, where small worries about money mix lazily with an unfamiliar flutter of the heart, carry you gently into sleep. The young man had pawned his sleeping clothes and now held a 50 jeon silver coin in his hand. The moment he felt its rough, solid weight, freshly minted, barely worn, the gloom that had clung to his face like a spiderweb suddenly seemed to lift. He crossed the Ochanomizu Bridge, passed the girls' high school, and walked along the road beside Juntendo Hospital toward his lodgings, peering into every single shop window along the way without missing one. Each time he caught his reflection, his straw hat yellowed by the sun, his hair grown shaggy and tangled, damp with sweat like a frog caught in the rainy season. "I really do need a haircut," he muttered to himself, taking off his hat, smoothing his hair down a couple of times, and putting the sweaty hat back on. Walking on, he came to a stop in front of a shop with a sign reading Deluxe Barbershop. But though he'd resolved to get his hair cut, he couldn't quite bring himself to step inside. The price there was worth his entire fortune. After hours of deliberation, he had finally managed to pawn his sleeping clothes for these 50 jeon, and he wasn't willing to hand it all over again within the hour of getting it. Somehow, keeping just 10 jeon jingling in the corner of his pocket felt like it filled some empty corner of his heart. He walked past the deluxe barbershop, its electric fan spinning proudly and its sterilizer gleaming in its own light, and continued on for a while longer. A warm Pacific breeze, blowing in from Tokyo Bay, brushed across his forehead, while the heat rising from the ground made him feel as though he were sitting inside a cauldron meant for scalding livestock. He looked around for a third-class barbershop. At one of those, a haircut cost only 20 jeon, plenty for a student. That would leave 30 jeon. 30 jeon. The thought that what remained was more than what he'd spend gave him a small sense of reassurance. Just knowing 30 jeon would still be in his pocket made it feel as though there was more he could still do that day. He found a third-class barbershop with just 2 chairs and a tin wash basin. He peered inside. The owner sat dozing with a newspaper still in hand, nodding off like a water mill run dry, occasionally waving a fan to shoo away flies. Gathering his courage, the young man stepped in briskly, greeting the owner loudly enough to startle him awake. "Konnichiwa, good afternoon." The owner, looking flustered at having been caught napping, jumped up, bowing repeatedly as he set out a pair of straw sandals. "Welcome, welcome," he said, and stood waiting behind the chair. The young man hung up his hat, took off his jacket, and sat down in the chair, glancing sideways. He couldn't help it, at the price list on the wall. Just as he'd thought, 20 jeon. He felt somewhat relieved. Still, just to be safe, he tucked the 50 jeon coin separately from the pawn ticket, pressing it firmly into one corner of his pocket, before settling back to prepare for his haircut. As the clippers moved back and forth across his scalp, all sorts of calculations ran through his mind. There were plenty of things he needed money for. He'd fallen 3 months behind on his boarding fees, and he was being pressed to pay up or be thrown out. Yet there was no telling whether his family back home could send money either way. Still, he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He'd have to come up with at least 10 won, even if it meant making something up. His closest friend from Sapgok came to mind, along with the clatter of the clippers. He'd go there first, mooch off him for dinner, and borrow a few tens of won. That friend's grandfather always wired money at the end of every month without fail. So today, of all days, the money should have arrived. He'd say something like, "My family's going to send money any day now," and borrow against it in the antime. That settled it. Round-trip streetcar fare would be 10 jeon. That left 20 more. 10 for shaved ice in this heat, and 10 saved for a bath tomorrow morning or later tonight. He was just tallying up the last few coins left over when the clippers gave his scalp a sharp nip. It stung, and he was annoyed, but he couldn't very well stand up and hit the man, nor scold him outright. All he managed was a wince and a muttered, "Ouch, that hurt." The barber apologized profusely, bowing his head again and again, though glancing in the mirror, the young man could see no real apology in the man's eyes, only that repeated bow. Somehow that irritated him further, and he found himself wanting to get some sort of payback. So whenever the barber tried to tilt his head one way, he tilted it the other. When told to bow his head, he lifted it. When told to lift it, he bowed. He fidgeted and twisted deliberately. In the mirror, he could see the crease of the character, Tuan, forming on the barber's forehead, the man clearly struggling to hold back his frustration. As the barber set down the clippers and brushed off the young man's shoulders, a long sigh could be heard from somewhere nearby. And just then, "Come and eat, dear." A voice like a silver bell rang out, the kind of voice that alone would suggest a beautiful woman. In that drowsy, dim afternoon, it struck him like hearing a lovely song out of nowhere, and his heart began to race. "Food?" The barber answered curtly, in a tone that made it clear the two were husband and wife. "Come here and shave this customer for me." It took the young man a good while to fully register what he'd heard. Surely, he thought, no one would ask a wife to shave a customer's face. Soon, the barber went inside, and the woman came out in his place. Glancing at her reflection in the mirror, the young man saw a woman who looked to be 23 or 24, with lovely eyes, a lovely mouth, lovely cheeks. Her waist was slender, and the whole line of her figure flowed smoothly, almost like silk. Somehow, the thought crossed his mind that she was far too beautiful a woman for a man like the barber. Her hand reached for the razor. He hadn't expected even her hand to be this beautiful. Thinking now that this hand was about to touch his face, the young man closed his eyes. The lathering felt a little awkward at first, but soon a faint warmth and a gentle feminine scent drifted over him, and her warm fingers came to rest softly, gently, exactly where he'd imagined they would. Through his closed eyes, he could sense her face drifting back and forth above his own. Her silken hand stroked his cheek. Her fingers moved freely across his face like a dance. A faint, sweet breath brushed past his nose now and then, and once in a while her soft knee grazed against his. He wanted desperately to open his eyes, but he had never before felt this kind of quiet delight in the presence of a woman holding a blade so close, and in the end he kept them shut. As the shave was nearing its end, he found himself dreading its finish, and worrying needlessly about what might happen once the barber came back from his meal. The shave finished, she washed his face and dabbed powder onto it. Something about the white powder against his sun-darkened skin seemed to strike her as funny. She smiled, biting her lip to hold back laughter. He smiled back. That was enough to make her laughter break free entirely. "Why are you smiling?" she asked, teasing gently as she lifted the towel from around his shoulders. He stood up as well. "Is it done?" he asked, and looked at her, only to find her laughing again. Not knowing quite why, his heart fluttered restlessly, but she only kept laughing, giving no answer. Reluctant to leave just yet, he asked for a glass of water. She went in and brought it back. As he drank it, he asked, "What's so funny?" "Nothing, it's nothing," she said, trying to compose her face, though laughter still danced in and out of her eyes. He felt a strong urge to take her hand, to stroke the back of it and tell her how lovely it was, but he held himself back, deciding to save that for another day. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, though he already knew the price. 20 jeon, she said, lowering her head slightly. He handed over the 50 jeon silver coin. Placing it in her lovely hand and putting on his hat, said, "See you again." She followed him out, calling after him to take his change. But by then his friend in Sapgok, the shaved ice, the bath, the worry over his boarding fees, all of it had vanished from his mind. He answered, full of bravado, "Keep it." He walked on, and when he glanced back, she was still standing there, smiling at him. A wave of satisfaction he couldn't quite put into words carried him forward with a spring in his step, as though something between them had been sealed, unchangeably, from that moment on. He walked faster, eager to go boast to his friend Kay back at the boarding house. Walking on, he grew hot and took off his hat, running his hand once or twice from the back of his head to his forehead, and then, suddenly, he stopped. "Wait," he muttered, low. "Of course, I just threw away 30 jeon for nothing." Then, gently, he touched the old scar on his fingertip, a mark left from a moxa treatment he'd had as a child while sick. That's tonight's story. The careful arithmetic of a young man weighing every jeon in his pocket, and the single moment when an unexpected flutter of the heart made him forget it all entirely. It lingers with a strange, quiet warmth. We hope you felt, alongside us, Na Do-hyang's delicate psychological detail and the drowsy summer air of a Tokyo back alley in the 1920s. Tonight, set down whatever weighs on your heart and let yourself drift into quiet sleep. Have a warm night, sleep well.